Yeah, good morning. Welcome to One Life City Church. If you guys don't know me, I'm Jay. I'm part of the teaching team here. And so, today I have the chance to introduce our first sermon series of the new year, and it's called Reconnect. And I just want to, before we jump in, I want to share the heart behind this series. Obviously, I mean, it doesn't really even need to be said, but we just got done with a year that just beat the crap out of the world, right? I mean, 2020 just really kicked us in the nuts. And, and I say that to be funny, but honestly, there's not really anything funny about it, right? I mean, just what we've been going through and still going through, just the unimaginable toll of human life, the toll on our families, our friends, our businesses, our livelihoods. I mean, you guys don't really need me to recount to you guys everything that we've been going through. You guys have been living it every single day along with the rest of the world. But the heart behind this series is that there's, I think, another consequence of this year that maybe we haven't talked about as much. And I think what that consequence is that for a lot of us, most of us, we've probably been experiencing some sense of disconnection, right? That there's been this sense of disconnection from God, that maybe we've felt kind of disconnected from God, not as close to Jesus as maybe we previously felt. Maybe a sense of disconnection from the church. I mean, not just the church, probably all of our relationships, but also including, just a sense of disconnection from the church and the people of God. And thirdly, I think a sense of disconnection even from ourselves, right? That I think for a lot of us, we just haven't quite felt like ourselves this year. And we just know that so many of us have been struggling with emotional and mental health, whether it be anxiety, stress, depression, anger, whatever it might be. And so I think all of us in some way and in some area in our lives have been experiencing a sense of disconnection throughout this year. And I think some of us might be thinking, well, there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? I mean, we don't know exactly when, but it feels like there's a pretty good chance that at some point during this year, things are going, the pandemic is going to end and things are going to at least start to get kind of back to normal, back to the way things were. And so, maybe I guess we could say, well, once the pandemic is over, everything will be fine and everything will be the way it was before all of this happened to us. But, I think wisdom might say, I think we need to explore what it is, like explore and recognize what it is that has been exposed in our relationships, during this pandemic that is kind of causing us to feel disconnected, whether it be from God, from the church, from even ourselves and not feeling like ourselves. That, yeah, I mean, I guess we could just hold our breath and say, well, once this is over, everything will go back to normal. But I think it would be wise for us to explore, what is it that has been exposed, and to try to find paths and begin moving towards reconnecting now, and not just hoping that everything will go back to normal, when this is all over. And so just to give you kind of a preview of the series. So next week, our brother Matt Stricker, he's going to be teaching on reconnecting with the church. And so we know it's going to be good. We know he's going to bring it. And then in 2 weeks, Pastor Dave, our resident pastor / psychologist and warrior poet, he's going to be teaching on reconnecting with ourselves, right? Which again, also is going to be super good. And then in the final week of the series, we're just going to take a week to pause and reflect, to share and to discuss and process some of this stuff together. Okay, so that's where we're going with the series. And so today, what I want to talk about is reconnecting with God, right? So if this year you felt like you just had a sense of distance from God and not just quite as close in your relationship with Jesus as you're used to, this is your week. And, I mean, just some thoughts as we start here. On the one hand, it's not super surprising, right? I mean, I don't think any of us are super surprised that, our connection or relationship with God maybe is struggling this year. I mean, we're just going through crazy, we're just going through crazy, unimaginable things this year. So on one hand, it's not super surprising, but I think on the other hand, you could ask the question, well, why should that be? Right? I mean, technically speaking, God is spirit. He is available to us everywhere, right? He's available to us everywhere and at all times. So why should staying home more hinder us from staying connected with him as we were before? I think that's maybe a question that might come up. And so, I just want to, here's what we're going to do today. The difficult thing about having this discussion is that there's so many different reasons why you might be feeling less connected with Jesus, right? And so it's too hard to talk about all those things. We don't have time. I've already used up half of my time already, I feel like. And so there's too many things to talk about. And so here's what we're going to do. One thing that I'm sort of missing in 2020 is buffets, right? Me and Laura, we love us a good buffet, and so today is just going to be sort of a sermon buffet that I'm just going to lay out 5 possible reasons why you might be feeling less connected with God this year. And I whittled it down from 8, but I'm just going to give you 5. Um, and obviously we don't have time to talk through all the different steps for each of these, and so I'm just going to give you these 5 possible avenues for you to explore, and just give you one first step that you could explore in trying to move towards reconnecting or a deeper connection. Okay, and so that's what we're going to do. It's going to be sort of a data dump. Honestly, I'm just going to put it out there, and today it's just grab onto one thing that feels relevant to you. Okay, grab onto the 1 or 2 things that feels relevant to you. Okay, and so let's just jump right into this. Okay, so the first reason that I identified that you might want to explore in terms of why you might be feeling less connected with God this year is it's just a natural grieving process. Okay? It's just a natural grieving process. And again, we're just going through something extraordinary right now, and some of us have been hit harder by this than others, right? And so just the shock of it all, the dramatic changes in a lot of our lives, the trauma, the loss of whatever it might be, whether it be loved ones or just businesses or jobs, whatever it might be. And so I think it's important for us, and I'm sure Pastor Dave is going to talk about this more in a couple of weeks, but I think it's important for us to recognize that most of us are going through some sense of grief and mourning during this time and everything that we're going through. Matthew chapter 5, verse 4, it says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted," right? From Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And, as I was thinking about grieving, a passage that came up in my mind was from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And I think we're going to put that up there. And, we're not going to talk about all of the words in this passage, but in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, I feel like actually gives us a pretty good picture of grief and mourning. And some of the lines that I kind of keyed onto in this passage are, he says, "There's a time to weep and a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn and a time to dance. There's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. There's a time to be silent and a time to speak." And I don't know, just those lines really stood out to me because I think something that I've learned over the years, maybe even from this church, is that there's no one way to grieve. Like there's no one right way to grieve. And that grieving can be all over the map and look like different things at different times in the process. At times grieving is sadness, right? And then other times it's anger. Sometimes it's depression. Sometimes it's laughing. Sometimes it's crying. Sometimes it's even forgetting, right? Sometimes grieving is sometimes just forgetting about the pain or whatever it is that we're grieving over, or being distracted from some of those things. And sometimes it's just numbness, right? Sometimes it's just not knowing what we feel, if we feel anything at all. Sometimes the process of grieving, it's work, it's active, it's getting up and challenging myself to continue living and moving forward. And sometimes it's just getting through the day is enough of a victory for that day, right? That there's no one way to grieve, and grieving can encompass all of these things at different times and different parts of our grieving. And so, I think one is to recognize that part of why we might feel less connected from God this past year is just, it's a natural process of grieving. And so the one step that I want to give you for this one is just accept your grieving process, and give yourself permission to be up and down and in different places with your feelings and not be in the same place every single day. But do reach out if you're feeling overwhelmed by your grief. I think that's important. If you're feeling overwhelmed by this process of grieving and mourning, please reach out to somebody. Reach out to the pastors, reach out to your mustard group, or just somebody that you're close to. Okay. So, and I'm sure Pastor Dave will talk about more of these things. All right, number two, like I said, this is just data dump. We're just going to plow ahead. All right. Number two is, I think another reason for disconnection might be just not gathering with the church. And I think Matt's going to probably talk more about this next week, so I won't dwell on it too much. But Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25, it says, let us not neglect our meeting together. And in First Peter, it tells us that basically it's the church together, that we're each like stones in the building of this temple where the Spirit of God dwells, that there's something about the gathered community of believers and the relationships we have with one another that allows the Spirit of God to dwell among us. And so, some of you guys might be thinking, well, we can't gather with the church. Like, church is closed, right? And so what are we supposed to do about that? And, that thought reminded me of when Jesus was talking to the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4. And you'll remember she was kind of questioning him like, well, our people say we're supposed to worship on this mountain, and the Jews say that we're supposed to worship in Jerusalem. Like, what's the right answer? And what Jesus said to her was, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship. Right? He says that God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. And so I think it's important for us to recognize, we part of the reason why we might be feeling more distant from God is we're realizing just how important the gathering really is. For some of us, maybe we needed to learn that this year, that really just how important the gathering of the church is to our spiritual lives. But I think we also need to recognize that the church is so much more than just the gathering in this certain building, in this certain place, right? But that there's so many different ways for us to gather, and there's so many ways for us to be the church together. I mean, right now we're having a worship service over Zoom. My mustard group this year, shout out to Dave Martin and Steve Hong, but we've been meeting all year, every week, consistently over Zoom. And that's been a great time for us to be the church and to bless one another and be together, right? And more than that, just getting creative, right? Like I've had numerous lunches with friends just out at Tri-City Park, and we bring our little lawn chair and we sit 12 feet apart. We eat our food. We wear our masks when we're not eating, and we've had really great times of fellowship together. And yeah, it's a little bit awkward at first, but I mean, it's totally doable. Or sitting out in somebody's front yard or even backyard if there's enough room. Dave and I, we had a meeting about this series, hiking at Craig Park. I think that's the park, and sitting at benches across from one another, 20 feet apart from, maybe it wasn't 20 feet, apart from one another. The point is, there's so many different ways for the church to gather, right? There's so many ways for people to gather if we're willing to just be like, okay, yeah, this is a little unusual. It's not what we're used to, but it's still good, right? It's still good. It's not exactly the same, of course not, but it's still good. And so the step for this one, if maybe it's just not gathering with the church while you're feeling more distant from the Lord this year, the one step I want to give you is seek out a safe gathering. Okay, seek out a safe, key operative word, safe gathering. Whether it be, if you're not in a mustard group, email. You could do it right now, even while I'm speaking. That's okay. Email the pastors and be like, I would like to be in a mustard group. Which group can I join? Set up a call, set up an outdoor, distance lunch or whatever it might be. Just do something to seek out a safe gathering, and help your partner if you're married and you have kids. You can't just do it by yourself, right? So we need to help our partners to be able to do that, whether it be offering to watch the kids, whatever it might be. Help each other be able to seek out a safe gathering. Okay, so that's the one step for that. Okay, here we go. Keep moving on. Number 3. The third thing I think that we can explore and why we might be feeling disconnected from the Lord is not engaging in spiritual activities. Not engaging in spiritual activities. And I was really searching hard, like, I don't like the word activities. That doesn't seem like the right word. I don't want to give the impression like there's these rituals that we need to do. There's these magic formulas that we do, and then we'll feel close to God. I didn't want to give that, that kind of feeling. But at the same time, there are these certain activities, or you could even call them spiritual disciplines, that God has told us, here's a way for you to engage with me. Here's a way for you to engage with my spirit. James chapter 4, verse 8, it says, draw near to me and I will draw near to you, right? And so for some of us, one of the reasons why we've been feeling more distant from God is we just haven't been engaging in these spiritual activities and these spiritual disciplines. And maybe we haven't had as much help from other people in doing those things because we're not gathering as much. But, I think some of these are like the most obvious. We talk about them every week, prayer and meditation, right? Spending time in prayer and meditation and quieting yourself and communing with God. The word, right? That God says that the word is breathed out by his spirit. And so if we want to be connected to him and his spirit, we need to be in the word. So those are kind of the obvious ones that we always talk about. But maybe a couple others that I would add to that is music. Singing and music, that the Bible actually tells us that that's also a spiritual activity, a spiritual discipline of music and singing. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 19, it tells us, sing and make music from your heart to the Lord, right? We're actually instructed to make music and to sing, And another one that maybe we tend to ignore is being out in nature, right? Being out in nature. If you look at Psalm 19, verses 1 through 2, and if you read that, it says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. You guys are getting closer to my face than you probably wanted to, but I have to see the screen. I think there's one more verse, right? Yeah, day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge, right? That there's something about creation itself and being out in nature that reveals to us the presence of God. And so, a very practical thing, a very practical spiritual activity is just getting outside, right? That some of us maybe, in trying to be safe this year, have just kind of stayed inside too much. That there are safe ways to get outside and be away from other people, but still be able to, be in nature and be in creation. Go to a park, go to a beach if it's, not too crowded, go hiking, go up into the mountains. But there's something about being in nature and observing creation that also is a spiritual activity that helps us to connect with him. And maybe the last thing is solitude, right? Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and to be alone. And so I think there's these spiritual activities and disciplines that we need to engage in. So the one step, I think your first step in this one, if this might be why you're feeling less connected, is just find your space, right? Find your space to connect in these activities, whether it be a certain location in your home or a certain time in your life. Maybe there's like a particular room that you have in your house. Or for me, I really like to get out into the car. Especially right now, it's like hard to find your alone space because everybody's home all the time. And so for me, my alone space is the car. And I like to get out into the car a lot. And I can also listen to music in the car or sing if I want to, or maybe it's just a particular space in your day, like having a daily walk. And again, I think, if for families, you guys need to work together to be able to make that happen for each other. But if one of you guys feels like, yeah, I'd like to have like a daily, just a quick, 15, 20 minute daily walk where I can be alone with God, work together and figure that out. Make music. Maybe you have an old guitar that's been sitting in the garage, bust it out, right? Bust it out, make some music with your, with yourself or with the family, whatever you got to do. But we need to engage in these spiritual disciplines and these spiritual activities if we want to be able to engage with the Lord. Okay. All right. 2 more. Let's see how we're doing. Okay. We're doing okay. All right. Number 4. Maybe one of the reasons why you're experiencing this disconnect is you have questions or doubts. Right. And so maybe, this time has just raised certain questions in your mind about God, certain doubts. Or maybe those questions and those doubts were always there, but this time has sort of just really brought them to the surface and exacerbated those questions. And so, maybe there's just these questions that have been dogging you. And, I think, or maybe you're even mad. Maybe you even feel mad or disillusioned with God. And so I think that could definitely be a reason why some of us are feeling disconnected from him. And one thing I'll say, sort of as a caveat to this, is be sure if you're feeling like you're mad with God, be sure you're actually mad at God. Because one thing that I've discovered over the years, just in pastoral ministry and just being a believer, is that I've oftentimes found that people say that they're mad or disillusioned with God, but they're actually mad at people, and they're actually disillusioned with people. And more so over the last few years, I've heard a lot of my friends really struggling with their faith, and the reason that they cite is actually what they see people doing, what they say people who claim to be Christians doing, whatever it might be. And so I think one thing is you got to make sure we know who we're mad at and who we're disillusioned with, because I often find that sometimes when people say that they're mad at God, or sometimes when people say that they're mad at God, it's not actually because of something that Jesus has said or done, but it's actually all things that people have said or done. And I think it's important for us to be able to discern that and distinguish between those two things. But I mean, if it is due to questions or doubts that you have about God or about the Bible or whatever it might be, don't be afraid to ask those questions. I think for a lot of us, we've come up, whether it was said to us or we just kind of internally felt it, but we've come up with a sense that it's not okay to question God. It's not okay to question our faith, and it's not okay to question the things that we see in the Bible. But I think it's important for us to have the philosophy that if the truth is the truth, then why be afraid to question it? Right? If the truth is really the truth, why be afraid to question it? Let the truth show itself. And so, I mean, not every question can be completely answered, if we're going to be totally honest, but many of them can. There are many questions, I think, if we're not afraid to investigate and to ask them honestly, there's many questions that can be answered. And even those questions that maybe can't be fully answered, I think can be explored enough to make peace with the parts that we can, and with the parts that we cannot fully answer. But only if you're willing to be honest with yourself and with other people and explore these questions and these doubts that you have with an open heart, with an open mind. And so the one step that I would give you here, if you find yourself questioning or doubting God more this year and feeling disconnected because of that, the one step I would give you is, to borrow a phrase, speak your truth, right? It's not exactly the way that we're used to hearing about it, but speak your truth. Tell somebody what your questions are, what your doubts are, what your concerns are. Email your pastors. I feel like everything is resulting in email the pastors. So it doesn't have to be the pastors. It could be, somebody else, but, tell somebody. And maybe you're afraid, like, well, the pastors, I don't want them to be annoyed with me. I don't want them to be mad at me. Like they're going to think, oh, man, darn this person, they're just, questioning everything. Any pastor who is worth a salt, any pastor who's worth a darn, if you email them about questions that you're having about your faith or questions that you're having about the things that you read in the Bible, I guarantee you any pastor worth following is going to be like, yes, finally, they're getting serious, they're getting real, whatever it might be. They're going to be excited about that. And so please don't be afraid at all. And so my one step for you here is speak your truth. Ask the questions, have the conversation, start the discussion, seek out those answers with an openness of heart and mind. All right, last one and we're done. The fifth one, and like I said, I whittled this down. There's 3 that shall be unnamed, but the fifth one that I'll give you today is one of the reasons why we might be feeling disconnected from God is maybe we just realized that we were never really that connected to God personally. That could actually be a revelation that you might have had this year, that you just realize, hey, you know what? I don't know if I was really ever that close to God. And this just sort of brought that and exposed that to the surface. It's kind of like this. I don't know if you guys have this experience, but do any of you guys have like that friend where like you're cool with that person and they're in your crew, but you never hang out with that person by themselves? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like there's that friend where it's like you're always around them, but if it's if it's like everybody leaves and it's just you and that other person, it's really awkward. Like you never just hang out with just that one person one-on-one. And I think maybe for some of us this year has exposed that our relationship with God is a little bit like that we're around God a lot. We're around these things of the Spirit a lot. Um, but but we find that in this year where it's a lot more kind of one-on-one with God, that there's an awkwardness there. And we find that we're not really that comfortable in this sort of direct one-on-one relationship without kind of our friends and these other things around us. And so, I don't want you to see this as like some sort of like condemnation or rebuke, but as an opportunity, an invitation, right? That there's an invitation here. Now that this has been exposed, there's an opportunity and an invitation here for something more, to know that there's something deeper that you can have in your connection with Jesus and your relationship with him. And this is the opening, that's the opportunity. In Romans chapter 10, verses 8 through 9, it says that the word, what does it say? The word is near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart. That is the message concerning faith that we proclaim. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And so my one step for you guys here who maybe have discovered this year that you weren't as close to Jesus as you maybe thought you were, my one step for you is just, hey, if you're ready, confess and believe. Maybe this is your opportunity. This is your moment to really, truly take ownership of your relationship with God and make it your own. If you're ready, or if not, what will make you ready? And maybe that goes back to the previous one of asking certain questions and exploring certain things before you feel ready to make that confession of faith. But, if that is you and you feel like, yeah, I think I am ready. I want something more. I want that connection directly with God. I don't want that awkwardness when it's just me and Jesus. And if you're ready for that, here's a prayer that you could just say in your heart. And there's nothing magical about these words, but you could just pray to Jesus, even right now, as you're listening to me. You just say, Jesus, I see that I need you and I want you in my life. Please forgive me of all the ways that I fall short of who you created me to be. From this moment on, I want to follow you. Come into my life and lead me. And so if you're ready for that, pray that prayer or some form of that prayer in your heart, and then email the pastors and let them know that you did, so we can kind of have a more of a conversation about that. But those are the 5 that I identified. There's many more reasons why we might be feeling disconnected from God, but hopefully if you gravitate towards one of those, that you can kind of lock in on one of those practical steps to begin moving towards connection. Let's not just think, well, once the pandemic is over, everything's going to go back to normal. Let's take this opportunity, see what has been revealed and exposed, and let's begin to take steps towards deeper connection with Jesus now, even before the pandemic is over. And so I'm going to hand it over to Pastor. I'm going to hand it over to Pastor Jay, and he'll let us know what we're going to do next.